across from you this time.
Good.
Yeah, I brought sugar so I don't bore you to death.
I haven't had anything since my mango this morning, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My purse pen out. A couple days ago, I was lost without it.
Are these actually from Brooklyn?
Yes, they are. So there's a deli in Annapolis that gets fresh bagels and fresh breads and cookies. They get them shipped in on a daily basis. So before I left this morning, I'm like, I'm going to treat everybody with some New York delicacy.
Well,
I'm okay.
Go, please.
I wish I would have known. I just ate a bunch of candy at my desk working downstairs.
Okay, there.
are there any diabetic?
All right, folks, let's go get started. Call the meeting to order. Right, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In lieu of the prayer, we're going to let Rich talk. Roll call when you're ready, Liz.
Commissioner Donnie Carter.
Here.
Commissioner Nina Forsythe.
Here.
Commissioner Kevin Grove.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Ritchie.
Here.
And Mayor Robert Flanagan.
Here. I will need a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting.
I move we approve the agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. So, Rich, it's your time, man.
Thank you very
Where's
much.
our dime?
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Ray and council members, commission members. Thank you for the opportunity to come out. It's been a while. I think the last time we were here face-to-face was November. We made it through a very arduous 90-day session, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. But before I do, let me just distribute. I sent these out electronically, but I thought since we are going to be talking about a 90-day session, let's walk through the reports together. I've got extra notes if you'd like it. When I say this was an arduous session, I mean that not just because of the work that we were involved in, but overall it was a very tough year. It was a long session, even though it's 90 days. You know, we had everything from a very difficult budget cycle. We're going to have ongoing budget issues. Again, there was issues related to public safety, public housing. And in between factoring with all of the budgetary issues, we had over 3,400 bills, almost 3,500 bills, which was an unprecedented amount this year. It seems to be ticking upwards every year, more and more of these pieces of legislation coming in. So we're watching all of that. There's a lot of volume for us to be flagging bills and watching what is coming in and out, what the impacts are to local government, municipalities. And then towards the end of March, we see the tragedy in Dundalk and Baltimore City with the bridge collapsing. So compounded with the budget issues and the issues related to what we were working on in Annapolis, you add that, it just adds for a lot of just strain on everyone. But we've been able to pull through. We still have a lot of work to do on the budget for next year, and I think this report kind of reflects some of what we did this year, and I say we, the legislature did this year with the governor. I'll touch a little bit about that, some of the highlights in the budget itself, and then also talk a little bit about some of the local stuff that we've worked on, specifically for the City of Frostburg, and I'll get into that a little bit more in depth. But first and foremost, if you look on the first few pages, it really provides a snapshot of the 90-day budget session. Governor Moore came in with a balanced budget, was actually a smaller budget than last year. It was about $63 million. He focused on 4 major areas this year in his press conference, and that was public safety, affordable housing, increasing the state's competitiveness, and also increasing the state's profile of service. That was the 4 themes that he really strived to, and you can see that in his overall portfolio of bills that he put forward this year. And while we were going through that budget process, we were seeing that the Board of Revenue estimates from the fall were just indicating that we were not hitting the mark on the revenues on versus how much spending we were investing in for either incentives or resources or programs for the state. So there was an impasse. Once we saw the budget submitted to the General Assembly, the Senate provided their decision-making process, and it was very aligned on what the governor had. There was no increases in taxes. It was a balanced budget. The House saw things a little differently. The House is a little bit more progressive, and they realized that we have a structural deficit on the forecast. We have failing infrastructure. There was a concern about the governor's budget where it was cutting local highway revenues. That's a lot of money goes back to this area and other parts of the state that need those dollars. So the House decided to provide a proposal in March that was going to increase fees and taxes along with expanded internet gaming. And in the totality of that package was about a $1.3 billion tax package. Now, through those deliberations in March, all the way up to literally the days of the end of session, the House and the Senate were at an impasse. They were trying to figure out a balanced way of taking some of the ideas that the Senate produced along with the governor's proposal and what the House was trying to do. And you'll see on the bottom of page 2 and into page 3 that they came to a compromise. They wanted to make sure that there was investments for highways and infrastructure. There was also investment, obviously, in our blueprint for Maryland, which is the Kerwin Commission on Public Education, which is now funding all the way through FY27. And there was also a commitment to ensure that we had dollars for shock trauma. And you can see on the chart on page 3 where those dollars are coming from to compensate for those services, but more importantly, how we're going to be paying for it. Now, these are just forecasts for right now, so we'll see how it all plays out in the next few years. But we came away with avoiding tax increases that the governor was very adamant he didn't want to see happen, along with the Senate. We also didn't see an increase on the tolls, which was also proposed by the House. And we didn't see combined reporting, which is a corporate tax increase that the legislature had been pushing for almost a decade. And we didn't see the adoption of internet gaming, which is also called iGaming. iGaming was a very controversial piece of legislation this year. It was going to expand gaming in Maryland. It was going to provide an opportunity for the citizens of Maryland to make a decision, much like we did about 12 years ago on the 6 casinos. It's going to go to referendum, and then if it went to referendum and passed, then the legislature would take up the implementation of iGaming. The decision makers in the conference committee with the budget decided this was not the year for that, and the Senate was very adamant they didn't want to see any gaming expansion. So that will be tabled for another discussion. More than likely it'll come back next year or the year after that. Seeing the projections on where we are going to be fiscally over the next few years, I don't see how we don't come back next year with some of these familiar discussions around additional tax increases and potentially internet gaming coming back. So there may be a Groundhog Day effect in some of what we're going to be talking about next year. If you look at some of the highlights at the bottom of page 3 and into page 4, really gives you a nice snapshot of where the state is investing our state dollars, our general fund dollars. We are at a balanced budget. Constitutionally, we have to be. We do have reserve funds, about $2.4 billion. That's a combination of money in the rainy day fund and also in our general fund. That's at the top of page 4. We also provided needs for the transportation, as I mentioned ago. This budget does reinstate highway user revenues back to the locals. There's an investment of $257 million that are going to be generated to help transportation needs across the state. We're also looking at supporting the needs in Baltimore and Baltimore County with the collapse of the Key Bridge. So that's about $275 million coming out of the rainy day fund to help support that. As I said before, we also are seeing an investment with the Blueprint, which is our public education. That money that's coming out of the new cigarette fee increase, we're going to see that the budget pretty much erases any projected problems and shortfalls up till fiscal 27 for the Blueprint, which is very laudable on the efforts because it's a $40 billion investment over the next 10 years for the state. And then we also saw not only some of the projects that were involving not only the state in terms of the capital side, but there was also a lot of budgetary investments in programs that impact you. And there's a few of those that are mentioned here, such as rental housing, expansion of SNAP benefits. There's also an increased amounts for supporting Medicare Part D. There's a lot of concerns about that with seniors during the discussions and deliberations in the budget this year. And so we saw a lot of those stakeholders coming into Annapolis. So overall, the budget is intact for what it's worth. We did avoid another concern about tax increases. But again, there's going to be a lingering conversation with the governor's office and the budgetary leadership over the next few years. So plan on seeing sort of the redundancy over the next couple of cycles on these reports with those discussions. And we'll keep you apprised of what happens. The fiscal year for the next budget will start on July 1st, and we'll be beginning some of our priorities here for Frostburg. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. There were also policy bills that we were heavily involved in and watched. One in particular starts on page 7. Mayor Bob, Mayor Ray from Cumberland, along with some of the Western nonprofits, were part of a piece of legislation that was brought by the Maryland Municipal League called Senate Bill 14, which was the tourism zone piece of legislation. It was a priority bill for MML. It was also supported by the governor, his Department of Commerce. It was one of the first bills that was introduced this year, and it was actually falling perfectly in line because it was during PACE. So we had Mayor Bob was there, Mayor Ray was there, and we were about to testify, but the chairman cut the testimony down a little bit because he had such overwhelming support for the legislation. But nonetheless, we had our presence made there. The bill passed and was actually signed into law last Thursday. And so compliments to Frostburg and their involvement. MML actually pulled me aside thanking us for our Western Maryland representation for this bill. So part of that is a tribute to all of you and your support. There was also a handful of other bills that we watched that had a local impact, and those can be found on pages 8 through 9, and the bottom of page 9 also covers some of those discussions. And these are primarily bills that were introduced by Senator McKay and Delegate Jason Buckle. Primarily the ones I'm referencing are House Bill 507. That's a property tax credit for Allegheny and Garrett counties for any construction of housing. There's also another property tax credit that was introduced by Delegate Buckle, which was on page 9, House Bill 636. This is a property tax credit for for the Evergreen Heritage Center. And then we also saw a large bill that was supported by the delegation, which was the Allegheny Regional Recreational Economic Development Authority establishment. Again, we did not take any positions officially on these bills, but Mayor Bob talked with Elizabeth. We were very involved in monitoring these bills. We had discussions with the sponsors of the bill, and all three of those bills passed. We also saw a piece of legislation that our city attorney was concerned about. This was House Bill 243. It was a designated bill related to tax sale revisions, and it was introduced by the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development. Michael Cohen and I, along with Mayor Bob and Mayor Ray last year, worked on several tax sales revision bills that were priorities, and we saw them successfully pass. Some of what this bill was initially going to do was going to change some of that efforts, and through the support of MACO asking for amendments, MML had concerns with that. We obviously had concerns with this bill. The bill was heavily amended by the time it reached the Senate, and to some fortunate circumstances, the proponents that saw this bill that were spearheading it, once it reached the Senate version of it, they were actually opposing the bill. So by the time it got to the Senate, the proponents of the bill said, we don't even want this bill any longer. So it failed in committee, and that's where it rested. So we'll see if a different version of it comes back next year. But those are just some of the snapshots of the bills that we watched. You also received, the day after Sonny died, a very comprehensive bill report of all the bills we flagged for the City of Frostburg. So if you have any questions about that report or any of those bills, feel free to reach after the meeting or offline. I'm happy to go through those with you. But one of the major issues that I really think we should talk a little bit more about is the conversations that I had with Mayor Bob and Elizabeth leading into session, and that is the water issue with Town of Lonaconee and Frostburg. That was the priority, I think, for the City of Frostburg this year. And I would say in the moments leading into session, we already had conversations, preliminary conversations with the governor's office and staff, saying we need a focus with the governor on this issue. We actually had an unofficial meeting during PACE. I actually was able to see some of the governor's staff, and we pulled Mayor Bob aside. And I think, Elizabeth, you were there, right? Or was it just us? It was such a blur. But it was certainly Mayor Bob there talking with the governor's staff. And I think you had a good 10 minutes with Molly Byron and Dylan Goldberg. That was really the beginning of the conversations. And within a week's time after that, it was ongoing daily conversations with Elizabeth, Mayor Bob, and the governor's staff on what we needed. And while the situation hasn't changed in those last few months, the conversations have been ongoing. And I can tell you that confidently the governor's office wants to help support the situation. We're just trying to find out how we can do that. Some of that requires funding. There are some short-term investments that Frostburg may need to continue the service that you are with Lonaconee. If there's a long-term partnership between the town and the City of Frostburg to continue providing that water supply, we've also provided the long-term investment that we may need state support on. And we were at the point back in March, leading into a week before the bridge collapsing, where the governor's office made some suggestions on how we can find some of that money. There are some programs through the Department of the Environment that we're going to be looking at as the short term. My most recent meeting with the governor's office last Thursday was maybe there's some long-term investment that we can put in this coming year's budget. I guess it's fiscal year 26. So the conversation that we'll be having over the summer may require us to maybe seeing some money in that budget. Elizabeth and I actually have a meeting scheduled with the governor's staff to pick up where we left off in March on the areas of the short-term investments, and talking with the governor's staff on really leveraging those dollars potentially in NDE's revolving grant fund. So I'm looking forward to bringing up to where we started back in January and where we stopped, unfortunately, due to the bridge. So I'm looking forward to continuing where we are and the progress we can make with the governor's office. As I said before, there seems to be a very strong commitment that the governor wants to help the City of Frostburg and Town of Lonaconee on this. They realize that the requests by Lonaconee, the investment that would require versus what the partnership that Frostburg is providing is a much more manageable, much more feasible way of moving forward. How can we get there so that it's making Frostburg whole, and it's providing an opportunity for you to maintain that relationship you've had with the town. So we are meeting in the morning, I think at 11 a.m. on a virtual meeting with the governor's staff, along with Elizabeth and myself, and we'll happily provide you updates on how that meeting goes.
This would be like potential funding in case Lonaconee decides to go forward with, just continuing with Frostburg supplying the water.
Correct. As I mentioned a moment ago, we provided communication, both Mayor Bob and he even put together a formal letter with Elizabeth's help on some of what the short-term needs are, along with what the long-term needs are. And the short-term or the immediate need is upgrading the fan press, and we talked a little bit about that with the governor and what that cost would be. So we're hopeful that the funding through the MDE program could help with that short-term need. But if Lonaconee, and again, these are conversations I've not been privy to, but if Lonaconee does come back to Frostburg to say, we have to maintain an indefinite relationship and partnership for you to providing us the water for the town, it's also been communicated to the governor that if that is the reality and the pathway where it could potentially require Frostburg to maintain that type of water support for the town, we need state support. And so we apprised them of what that long-term request would be. And again, most recently, we had that conversation about maybe seeing some of that support find its way in the next fiscal budget. And I'm sure we're going to be bringing that up on Thursday again.
There's no date by which we need to know whether Lonaconing is planning on continuing indefinitely or
That's
going on its own.
That's a great question, Madam Commissioner. That's one of the universal questions we're trying to extract out of the town.
I mean, we should know at some point, right?
It would be very advantageous for us to have that information so that we can communicate that back to the governor and to MDE.
The last formal communication we had from the town was in April, and that has come to pass now. So that's part of the issue. Is Hayden is running into some problems operationally at the water treatment plant because of the increased volume. It's 20 to 25% by month increase in volume, and so the sediment bays are filling up faster, which is this short-term request for the fan press, which has been identified through some trial and error as the best option to extend, the serviceability of those sediment bays and not create additional problems. So,
But investing all that money into the increased capacity.
doesn't make sense when you're kept being told that it's only going to be 30 to 60 days out.
Right, so it would be nice to have a date certain.
Yes, and the governor's office has asked several times, like, do you have a date? And we've kind of not pushed back, but we've responded saying we've had dates, several dates, and they've been extended. And so our hope is that maybe there's a communication from the governor's office to the town of Lonaconing and to maybe MDE to say, okay, what is a definitive timeline on when Lonaconing is going to either decide to stay on or off? Because that will then really play into our strategy and support for
Right.
any state funds.
Yeah.
If it is only going to be a short term, then that short term
Have different
monetary request,
implications.
absolutely, and the funding request will be much different.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think I'm actually very happy to know that we've got this meeting back on track, and we're going to have the conversation beginning on Thursday. So stay tuned. I appreciate everyone's patience. I know we were expecting a short-term solution around March, and we were getting there, and then the catastrophe with the bridge has really pivoted a lot of the resources from the governor's staff to be centralizing in part of Baltimore City. But they are fully aware of it, and that was one of the priorities after speaking to the governor's office on Thursday. Within a matter of maybe minutes after talking to the governor's office, there was already an exchange of setting up this meeting. So they
Well, I know
realized the
he's very
importance
much
of it.
aware of the whole situation. It was like the first visit he made was to Lonaconing.
Yes. So yes, it's definitely not unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Now it's just trying to figure out what the town's going to do so that we can then make the most appropriate steps forward from a request standpoint so that
Right.
we can invest the proper way for the state dollars if they
Sure.
come available. The only other thing I would say too, in terms of some, I guess, positive highlights, was just the opportunity for Frostburg to have some real opportunities to have face time in Annapolis, and an opportunity for I would say the city to have a cultivated relationship with the governor's office. There was certainly a lot more awareness of Frostburg this year with Mayor Bob, being in there participating with MML, but PACE, but putting some real official letters, communication to the legislature on some of these bills that we were watching and supporting. And then obviously having the opportunity for Mayor Bob and Mayor Ray to be before the governor at the Board of Public Works for the railroad back in late February. And after that, having about 10 minutes time with the governor and lieutenant governor. I mean, those are rare moments that most people usually don't get during session, but Frostburg did. And then Mayor Bob had a great opportunity to see the governor 2 weeks ago again. So I feel, as I said earlier today, before we went on record, I feel that the governor really enjoys his time out in Western Maryland. And I think he sees that there's a real value to continue to provide the investments that they can from the state into these areas, particularly Cumberland and Frostburg and other parts of Western Maryland. So the cultivation that City of Frostburg is making is only just going to help further propel whatever needs that we have long term in Annapolis, which is great. So kudos and congratulations to a really, I think, a positive 3 or 4 months in Annapolis.
Anybody else have any questions for Rich?
I'm kind of curious. So, session's only 90 days, and then there's bill signings and stuff. So I'm kind of curious about like what happens during the remainder of the year. I imagine there's like carrying out, bills that have been passed. Is there also like ramping up for the next session, like happening inside the governor's office? Do like the various legislators continue to meet with the governor and that? Okay.
Yes, no, all of what you said is correct. Yes, so there's no really a down period for us. Everyone has this misnomer like, oh well, your job's 90 days and you can play golf for 8 months. No, it's very much. This is where a lot of the work is done now. The sausage is being made, as they say. The grunt work of having these meetings and the preparatory type of meetings for legislation or reintroduction of legislation, any budget requests that we would like to make. This is the time that we'll start doing that, because as the cycle starts to close down for this year on June 30th, the next cycle begins the next day. We'll be having those discussions throughout the summer, so that if we do need to look at either capital funds or operational funds, and if we're looking at maybe a pot of money in maybe a department, those conversations have to take place, because the departmental budgets will be provided and proposed to the governor's staff by early September. So yes, a lot of those conversations are happening. MML, as I said before, and MACO will be having those summer conferences. We'll be hearing what is the pulse for next year, what is going to be some of the things that are going to be burning up in Annapolis. But I think, as I said before, echoing what this report says, I think there's going to be a lot of concentration around budget. I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion, and that's going to reverberate on everything, not just, transportation infrastructure. Is going to have everything from programs to, things that are going to be invested by Frostburg to, metropolitans like Baltimore City. Gaming is going to be another topic again. But then once these bills are passed, that's where the implementation comes in. And these agencies or private sector folks that are going to be impacted by these bills are now going to have to abide by this. How do we make this work? And the next question is, well, maybe we didn't hit the mark on some of these the right way. We got to come back next year to correct some of the policies that we just passed, because they're not working the proper way.
How about some of like the federal programs that they've been passed, but it takes like a year or two for them actually to get to the state, especially at the local level? Do you see some of that coming down the pike, especially with infrastructure?
Yes, I mean that's certainly, when it comes to building back the federal initiatives. I would love to see where we are and where those dollars are coming through as passed through to the state into the local governments. I think a primary project, or I would say priority, that we outline in the report is that, as I mentioned to Mayor Bob, that I would like to start looking at coordinating some meetings this summer with the governor's director of federal relations to find out where that money started coming in, how's it being invested out here in Western Maryland primarily. But if there are major infrastructure projects that are just too unfeasible and unrealistic for the state to fund, can we look at that federal director to help leverage their relationships with our congressional delegation to help support our needs? So that's going to be some of the work that we're going to be spelling out this year. We're going to see some changes in our congressional delegation this year too. So that will also be interesting to see how that plays out. Great questions though.
It doesn't end.
It never ends. Never ends. No. But as I said before, I'd like to say thank you very much for having the opportunity to work with you this past 90 days and continue our work over the next 8 months going into session. So I'm always available. I try not to pester Liz on like random hours or days, but feel free. My phone is always available, and I'm happy to respond back within 24 hours. And I look forward to coming back up here. There's going to be some things that we're working with the governor's staff for him to be out here again, hopefully maybe 4th of July, maybe later on this fall. So if and when that happens, I will certainly prize you also. We can have some FaceTime with him and his staff.
The picture's really nice. But I can tell you all, I mean this, without him, I wouldn't have been in those pictures. And I wouldn't have got to know Dylan, I wouldn't have got to know Molly, obviously, and so the FaceTime is very much a big part of what he did, but it's also the idea that they're all first-name basis people now for me, you know, so there's a reason you have a lobbyist, that he gets you in front of people, so I mean, I hope I made you all proud of what we were able to do. A lot of trips, but we made the best of it, and again, to be able to do the governor's show up here, and the first elected official that he gives a hug to is me. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I
Much appreciated.
saw that
You're
in
welcome.
the photo too.
Yeah. Of course, we were laughing about son Brady. But we were laughing.
That's the
so
thing.
a good thing.
He knew your son's name. He knew where he was deployed.
He said, how's my favorite Army boy doing? And I said, he's okay now. He said, he's all settled in Honolulu. I said, getting there. I said, it's been a long move and so on and so forth. I said, it's rough. I said, there's luau's to go to. So that's what we were regretting
Archip
about.
posting.
Yeah, that's what we're regretting about. You're welcome to stay.
Yeah, I absolutely will.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
There's 2 items under new business. Wait, right?
Let Hayden do the first
Oh,
one.
sure. Come on, Hayden. Have a cookie, Hayden.
Good cookies.
You don't have to twist my arm. Resolution 2024-24 is to award the bid and authorize contract for asbestos abatement, demolition, and construction of a new parking lot and mechanic and park streets to the low bidder Carwell Incorporated in the amount of $547,887.00. So that is our parking lot project on Mechanic Street. It includes everything from demo of the existing to final construction of the parking lot itself. That was the low bidder. That was ballpark of where majority of the other bids were, so it's not like it's a crazy outlier. I feel confident in the bid and the bid package, so it would be my recommendation to award the bid to Belt.
Two things. We had 6 bidders for that project,
Oh, wow.
so that was
that was a lot.
great.
Yeah.
And they were within $100,000 of all of each other, so that was
3 of them were within 30,000.
Yeah, I mean, within this number, because I was here before, I was really amazed that within $30,000 with the 3 low bids. So
That
we
sounds
know
like-
that was, the ballpark was very tight. Yeah.
And then just as like a caveat, the one building used to be the deluxe cleaner,
Right.
and that is listed as an EPA potentially contaminated site.
Right.
I've worked with Triad Engineering to do the environmental testing, to clear it of its potentially concerning contaminants. They wanted some done in the building, but people were living in there.
Right.
So what, in talking with the engineer and Triad, what was recommended is we demolish the building, and we'll have to do a soil gas testing after the building is torn down. And then that could be a source of a change order, but I don't expect it would be a lot. It would just be landfilling a portion of the earth in a special landfill. And then we'd have to sign like an easement to keep it encapsulated in asphalt, not build a new structure on it at any point in the future.
Which is the master plan anyway, so.
So just as a heads up, that's really the only foreseeable large-scale change order we have with that project. And there's nothing been of any concern. They did soil gas testing all over the site, front and back, so hopefully everything comes back clean and we can get rid of that potentially contaminated status and make everybody happy. So, okay.
Well, since that's where some of the solar canopies are going to go when we finally get the microgrid project up. Do you know if there has to be any preparation for?
So
Yeah, we've already talked about
Oh,
it. It's
okay.
part of the design.
the conduit
Okay.
is in the ground for the solar canopy, so they won't have to dig up the parking
Great,
lot.
great, good.
That was what delayed this project so much, was the Bennett Brewer and Associates getting the information. They weren't that far along in the design on the solar side of things, so them getting enough information that was actually usable, therein lied the delays.
It's from that company in Pittsburgh or something.
It's whomever Optimize is using. My mantra of 2024 has been nothing good comes easy, so.
second for resolution 2024-24.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2024-24.
I'll second. Moved and seconded. Nick, Rich, any public comment?
Thank you.
Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No?
Okay, the next one, you received an email from the city attorney regarding this.
Right.
However, so you have been part of this ongoing opioid litigation in which only if the city isn't entitled to settlement funds do the attorneys get paid, and the attorneys, the opioid attorneys, not the city attorney, they have identified through their research and investigation throughout the various cases that pharmacy benefit managers and related subsidiaries should be added to the complaint because they played a role in the opioid epidemic. However, this requires formal action on your part to elect to participate. In Michael Cohen's casual terms, it's a no-brainer. So, but there really is no risk and only potential income to the city.
Yeah.
So,
Unfortunately, it wraps more people into the
and
loop, but that's what it does.
And the city has, I mean, the amounts of money the City of Frostburg is getting is very small. It is earmarked and then held in a special account because it can only be used for certain things outlined in the settlement agreements. Whether we spend that money directly or allocate it to Allegheny County's opioid task force that has a much larger pot of funding that I sit on is to be determined yet. But we're accruing money on an annual basis right now.
Oh, already. So, okay.
From some of the settlements that McKesson.
Oh, that's right, I remember,
Pratt,
yeah.
all-
Yeah,
yeah,
we were at the meeting,
yeah. So
Right.
different ones. Mount, I don't know.
There's a couple of them, for sure.
Purdue. Yeah. Okay, so with that, I'd ask for, if there's no questions, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve resolution 2024-25.
I move we approve resolution 2024-25.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Seeing no public comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Seeing we have no public. Anybody else have anything? Rich, thank you.
Yeah.
Nick, thanks for coming out. City staff, everyone have a wonderful evening.
All right.